Hi, it's George here, and I have with me today three 24-70 lenses for Sony E-mount. I've been using 24-70s for a very long time, and I'd actually say I probably shoot about 80 to 90% of my videos on these lenses. There are three on the market right now that are all very, very nice, and I just want to run through some of the basics that you should be considering if you're thinking of purchasing one of these. So first up, we have the Tamron 28-75. You may have noticed that it's not actually a true 24-70, but it's close enough and definitely worth considering if you're looking at something like this. We also have the Sony G-Master 24-70, a very popular lens that's been around for a little while. I'm sure some of you know it and have probably used it before. And we have the Sigma 24-70 art lens. This is quite new to the market and definitely something to consider when thinking about this focal length. So let's get started and I'll tell you a little bit more about each lens. Build quality is something really important to consider when thinking about which lens is right for you. So firstly, we've got the Sigma. The Sigma has really, really top of the range build quality, I'd say. It feels really great to use. The focus and the zoom rings are just really, really smooth and really, really consistent. It definitely has a really nice feel in your hands, and you should definitely be happy if you've got that on the front of your camera. I'd say the same goes for the G-Master. Really, really top of the range build quality as you'd expect from the Sony G-Master series. So definitely not got any complaints on that matter. The Tamron loses out a little bit here. It feels slightly more plasticky. It's not as satisfying to use the zoom or the focus rings, but it's not bad by any means. I'd say it's just not as top of the range as the other two lenses. The size and weight of a lens is also incredibly important to consider. Now, if you're like myself and you like using gimbals a lot, it's extra important because if you have a lens that's too big or too heavy, it can prove quite difficult when balancing gimbals and sometimes can even max out your payload and mean that you can't use it on a gimbal. So that's definitely something very important. This is where the Tamron comes into play. The Tamron weighs at 577 grams, which is incredibly light for a lens like this. So you won't have any issues mounting that on your camera and, balancing it on your gimbal. It should work perfectly. The Sigma is heavier and it's certainly also much bigger. It weighs in at 852 grams, so it's definitely a little bit chunkier and a little bit bigger. But again, I don't think you'll have major issues with maxing out your payload because it's not an ultra heavy lens, although it does definitely depend on which body you're using. Then we have the G-Master. The G-Master, as you may well know, it's not the lightest of lenses. It weighs in at 922 grams and it is bigger and chunkier than the other ones. Now for me, that's not a huge issue because, to be honest, I generally will shoot on the A7 series, very small camera body. So when I'm balancing gimbals and stuff like that, because the camera body is so light, I won't have massive issues using any of these lenses, but if you're using a bigger body or something like that, it's definitely something to think about. Now, let's get on to the testing so I can show you some of the footage I've been getting with these lenses. Image quality, that's what I want to talk about first. Image quality is so important for a lens. You've got to know that it's sharp, crisp, and just has a really nice look to it. And to be honest, all of these are fantastic. As you'd expect with the G-Master and the Art series from Sigma, everybody knows that the image quality on all of these is fantastic. The Tamron's image quality is also really good. I'd say it's marginally worse than the other two, but for me, it's actually a negligible amount, so I wouldn't worry about that. They're all really, really great. Minimum focus distance. Now for me, that's so important because, as I said, I will be using this lens for 80 to 90% of my work, which includes product shots. So if I want to get up close and personal to my subject, then I want to know that I can get those really ultra close-ups. So I tested all these out and this is what I found. The G-Master has a pretty consistent minimum focus distance across the board. It doesn't matter what focal length you're shooting at, it will be about the same. That's quite nice because if you use the lens all the time, then you know exactly the distance you can be and the focal length is irrelevant. So once you get to know the lens like the back of your hand, you'll know exactly how far away you can get from your subject. Now with the Sigma and the Tamron, I got slightly different results. The Sigma is listed online as having a minimum focus distance from 18 to 38 centimeters. That's from 24 to 70 millimeters. So I tested this out, and I personally found that it actually outperformed what it said online. At 24 mil, I felt I was considerably closer to my subject than 18 centimeters. So that's a huge plus for me that it actually said it's better than the specs list said. Now at 70 mil, I'd say it was around the same as the G Master. Around 38 centimeters was about right for maximum focal length. I found a similar thing with the Tamron. The Tamron is listed online as being from 19 centimeters to 38, from 28 to 75. And again, I found that actually at its widest focal length, I felt I got a little bit closer than 19 centimeters there. So that's a huge plus for me. And again, I feel like that actually really outperformed what it said online, which is always really nice to hear. At 75, I'd say it was about the same as what it's listed online as, at about 38 centimeters, which is the same as the G Master. Overall, I'd actually say that I was surprised that the G Master probably performed the worst here because of that consistent minimum focus distance. At its widest focal length, it couldn't focus as close as the other two. The Sigma and the Tamron both performed fairly similarly. I'd actually say that the Sigma did perform a little bit better, but they're fairly similar, and probably all of these lenses will more or less suit your needs. But if you do want to be shooting at a really wide focal length and getting a close focal distance, then the G Master might not be able to do it for you. Next, I tested video autofocus. Now, to be honest, this isn't something I use all the time. I'm an old school manual focuser, but for somebody that does use video autofocus a lot, it's really, really important. So I'll start off with the Tamron. The Tamron was probably the worst performer of the bunch here. It wasn't as quick and sometimes was hunting. It wasn't, I don't think it really did always the best job, especially when I got quite up close and personal to the camera. It wasn't the fastest, but it was still plenty good enough for most purposes. The G Master probably focused on myself the quickest out of all these lenses, and probably the most consistently. So that's a huge plus. It was really, really fast, and it nailed it quite quickly as I was moving forwards and backwards in the frame. The Sigma maybe didn't nail the focus as consistently as the G Master, but it did do something else which I really liked. It took maybe that little bit longer to find my focus, but when it did that, it moved it in a very slow and appealing way that to me felt very filmic and quite manual focus-esque. So for me, I really, really like that, because while it might take a little bit longer when I move forward to hit that focus, it's gonna move in a really, really nice, smooth manner. So for me, I actually think the Sigma was my favorite performer in this test, but if you just want something that's gonna get the focus every time and be most consistent, you're probably better off with the G Master. Now, I love a good focus ball. So focus breathing is something that's quite important to me when considering lenses. I want everybody's attention to be on the two subjects that I'm focus pulling between, and I certainly don't want anybody to be distracted by the edges of the screen and them moving slightly. So I'll just head straight into the tests. They all performed really, really well once again, as you'd expect from these three really, really nice brands. I couldn't really notice much focus breathing at all, and it certainly wasn't an amount that would bother me whatsoever. So again, there's not really a whole load to say about this point, but if you're like me and you're really, really particular about your focus breathing, you'll be left satisfied. The last test I want to go through with you guys is bokeh. It's really important to a lot of filmmakers, myself included, to have that crisp, circular, sexy looking bokeh in our images. And I have to say, all of these were really, really good. I was perfectly content with the bokeh from every lens here. If I had to pick a standout, I'd go with the Sigma, because anybody that's used any Sigma Art series knows that the bokeh on all of the lenses is superb and really, really clean. But I think all of these lenses will leave you with a smile on your face. Now, I'm done with all the testing, and now I just want to talk to you about a few usability points and some little things that I've noticed from using these lenses over the past few days. The first point is focus throw. Focus throw is how long you move the focus ring around to take it from minimum to maximum focus. And the G Master has actually quite a notably short focus throw, which means that with the slightest movement, I can go from minimum to maximum focus. Now for me, I really like that because I shoot very documentary style. I don't really know what I'm going to be shooting at any given moment and anything can happen. Therefore, the ability to shoot something here in focus to then all the way out there is the slightest of movement, which really works for me shooting on the fly. But I actually think my opinion probably differs from most people on this matter, because if you're shooting in a more controlled environment, having a longer focus throw, which the Tamron and the Sigma both offer, probably suits you a little bit better. This is because it enables you to be a lot more precise with your focus and lets you know that you've got it exactly perfect. And you'll be able to do that with a lot more ease than with the G Master. So it's just something to consider in terms of what kind of shooter you are, how controlled the environments that you're shooting in are. For me, it's the G Master, but I actually think for most, it's probably the other two. Another point I'd like to make about focusing before I put all of that to bed is that the Tamron, I just found it in general slightly harder to nail my focus every time. It was taking me a bit longer than it was with the other two to get the focus. So again, if you're shooting really on the fly, really run and gun, that's something that it did bother me a little bit. I'm sure if I owned the lens and I used it every day, I'd get used to it and that wouldn't really be a big issue. But it's definitely something to consider, especially when you're first using the lens. Another point about the Tamron's focusing is that it's non-linear. Linear focusing means that if I set the focus here and then I move it around to here, it will be exactly the same every time between those 2 points. The Tamron does not offer that, which means that every time you do focus pulls, you can't mark it up on the lens and you're just going to have to do it by eye. So if you're working in a very controlled environment where you're wanting that really, really specific focus pull, it's going to take you a bit longer and it's just going to be generally slightly more annoying to get that shot. It's not a huge deal, but if you're working in those kind of environments, definitely think about that. Now, what do I actually think? Now that I've told you all of that info, what have I actually got to say when considering these lenses? Well, the last point, and arguably the most important one, is pricing. They're all priced very differently. The G Master is currently £1,800, the Sigma is currently about £1,050, and the Tamron comes in at £700. Now these are hugely different price points, so you're going to expect different jumps in quality. So which one's right for you? Well, I'd probably say the best all-around lens is the Sigma. When you consider that price point, it's an awful lot cheaper than the G Master, and from my opinion, it's pretty much a very, very similar quality lens. So I don't see why you would want to spend that extra money on the G Master when you can just go pick up the Sigma for a lot less and it can deliver the same results. But this is where the Tamron really, really comes into play, because £700 for a lens of this quality, yes, okay, it's not quite as good as the other two, but it's an awful lot cheaper and it's still really, really good. So if you're a filmmaker on a budget, or you want something that's really small, really compact and nice and light in your kit bag, it's a much better option than the other two. So don't be put off by the fact that maybe optically it's not quite as refined as the other two lenses, because the price point matches that. So for me, if I was going to buy one for my own personal use, I would buy the Sigma. But if I was on a budget and I just wanted to save that cash or wanted to invest that cash in something different, then I would definitely get the Tamron and I would be completely satisfied by it. So that's all from me. If you want to know any more about any of these lenses, put a comment below and I'll get back to you with whatever information I can. But for now, thanks for watching and I hope you find the right lens for you.